There is something genuinely fascinating about the way British people communicate at work. And it is this: the words and the meaning are often completely different things. And it's not because the people in question are necessarily being dishonest. It's because there's an entire parallel level of communication running underneath the surface. One that is built on indirectness, politeness, and being tactful. Tact is an important thing in a British office. I've talked before on this channel about British politeness and indirectness, but I feel it is magnified in the British workplace. So once you learn to read and understand this parallel level of communication, it makes British colleagues a lot easier to understand. Less vague, less ambiguous, easier to interpret. So today we are focusing on British workplace communication. Things like emails, meetings, and those wonderfully polite phrases that don't always mean what they sound like. I have created a free British workplace cheat sheet. Details are in the description below. And without further ado, this is an intriguing topic, so let's get into it. One of the most important things to appreciate about British professional communication is that directness can feel uncomfortable. Now, in many cultures, understandably, being clear, direct, straightforward is considered efficient at work, maybe even professional. But in the UK, it can come across as a bit abrupt. So people instinctively soften their language, and they do it naturally, intuitively. For example, rather than saying, "This won't work," a British colleague might say something like, "I'm not entirely convinced this will work." Or, "We might want to think about that again. There may be a few challenges with that." And we would consider that to be diplomatic rather than dishonest. If we disagree with someone, our aim is to do it in a way that doesn't make everyone else feel embarrassed or awkward. And the professional, hopefully friendly atmosphere can stay intact, unchallenged, and undisturbed. So here are some phrases you might hear in a British workplace meeting. "That's interesting." I've talked about this one before. In a meeting, if someone says, "Oh, that's interesting," it could mean, "I don't agree," or "I'm not enthusiastic about this." It rarely means enthusiasm. It depends on the tone. If it's said after a slight pause, for example, "That's interesting," it is not enthusiastic. Let's circle back to that. This often means we're not going to do that. Nobody wants to reject the idea directly, so instead it gets pushed off to the side where it gets quietly forgotten, and no one does actually circle back to it. Perhaps we should consider another option. This one is fairly clear once you know the code. "That idea isn't good. We need to consider another one." An important cultural note is that British communication assumes a certain level of understanding, that everyone in the room can read these signals. And that is why international colleagues might feel a bit confused and a bit puzzled after leaving a meeting, because to them, the language sounded positive and collaborative. "Oh yes, let's circle back to that. That's interesting." But what they don't realise is what actually happened was a rejection. That's why it's important to be able to read the British signals. Let's move on to the work email. These are interesting ones because the language can sound very polite and courteous, but the person sending the email might have been quietly furious. I will show you some of the passive-aggressive classics. "Just a quick reminder" means you were supposed to do this already. "When you have a moment, please do this soon." "I just wanted to check in. Why hasn't this happened yet?" And an infamous one, "As per my previous email." This is a polite, professional, passive-aggressive way of saying, "I told you this already," if you refer back to that email. "As per my previous email, I said this." Again, in all of these is that typical British trait of wrapping urgency or frustration in politeness, essentially. And often words like "just," perhaps, or phrases like, when you have a moment, would you mind? They are doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the email, and they have a lot of subtext. They can make requests feel less like demands and more like suggestions, but really, they are still demands and they aren't optional. It's just blanketed in a polite way. Compare these two versions of the same request. A direct way, send me the document. Would you mind sending the document over when you have a moment? They have the same meaning, but a very different tone. And in a British workplace, that difference matters. If you were to write to someone, send me that document, the imperative, the command, without any softening language and even without a please, it would be considered too rude and too abrupt. Now, there are 3 strategies when it comes to language to be aware of in a British workplace. The first one I've talked about already, and that is softening. And that means you add words to cushion or soften a request. For example, could we possibly look at this again, rather than this needs changing. The second strategy is understatement. Again, another very typically British trait, something deeply embedded in our culture. And so in the workplace, rather than saying, this report is terrible, someone will say, it might need a bit more work. It might need a bit more work. And if you understand British communication, the message is still clear, it's just the delivery is different. And the third strategy is collective language. I love this one because it's so subtle, but makes such a difference. In the workplace, British people often avoid sounding too authoritative or too individual, too demanding. So, for example, instead of saying, you need to change this, you need to change this, you might hear something like this instead. Perhaps we could look at adjusting this. Not, you need to change this. Perhaps we could look at adjusting this. That collective language, it makes the responsibility feel shared, even though it isn't. It is still that person's responsibility to change it, but it has been delivered in a more collaborative way. Let me show you how these patterns combine in practice. Imagine someone has just presented their idea in a meeting, and a British colleague responds like this. I can see what you're aiming for. I wonder whether there might be another approach we could explore. On the surface, this might sound supportive, encouraging even, but the meaning is almost certainly, let's try something else. I don't like this idea. Let's try something else. Once you know that and you can hear that, meetings become a lot easier to navigate. The British workplace can feel baffling at times, but it does follow a certain type of logic. It's just that the logic is more about protecting people's relationships and keeping everyone comfortable rather than just speaking plainly. But as I've said, once you understand those patterns, the softening, the understatement, the collective language, you'll find it much easier to participate confidently, whether that be in a meeting or in an email, wherever in the workplace. Don't forget your free cheat sheet to help you survive the British workplace. Link is in the description below. And I would love to know, has there ever been an instance of you misunderstanding a British colleague or misreading the workplace at all? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you would like to support my channel and give back, you can always buy me a coffee. Again, links are below. Let me know if you would like more videos like this, focusing on workplace communication. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.